Dr. Craig Evans is with us all this week as we approach Easter weekend, and it's so helpful to have this distinguished professor of New Testament from Acadia Divinity College walk us through the historical context of Jesus' final week before his death and resurrection. So Dr. Evans, yesterday we talked about the triumphal entry of Jesus into Jerusalem and the significance of that. And then after he arrived in Jerusalem, he did something quite unusual. I'm just going to read a portion of that from Mark chapter 11, starting at verse 15. So they came to Jerusalem. Then Jesus went into the temple and began to drive out all those who bought and sold in the temple, and overturned the tables of the money changers and the seats of those who sold doves. And he would not allow anyone to carry wares through the temple. Then he taught, saying to them, "Is it not written, my house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations, but you have made it a den of thieves?" And the scribes and chief priests heard it and sought how they might destroy him, for they feared him, because all the people were astonished at his teaching. Now give us a little bit of the context of what's happening here and why Jesus would do something like that.
Well, first of all, you need to know that when he went into the temple, he's in the temple precincts. And the temple precincts would be like several football fields. It's a very large area. So he's not actually in the temple building, the sanctuary. Okay. Don't think of that. Don't think of it as though he went inside somebody's church and started pushing
desecrating things.
No, no. And so out in this large plaza, there were sellers of animals and money changers and so on, because you couldn't bring pagan coins with inappropriate images or something right into the precincts and say, I want to buy an animal that qualifies for a very holy sacrifice. And so there were rules about this. Well, what apparently had happened was the animal trade had become very lucrative, and the area where the Gentiles were allowed to congregate and pray, because they couldn't get real close to the sanctuary the way Jewish men could. And so Gentile men are further away. And so I think Jesus saw that the commercial interests and perhaps some other corrupt practices were encroaching on an area where the Gentiles could congregate and pray. And he saw that as a terrible testimony. For Jesus, the faith of Israel, belief in one God, the God of Abraham and the patriarchs, a covenant God, not this polytheism, Greco-Roman gods and all the rest of that, but the one true God, the creator of the world. What a testimony, and with it, what a responsibility, a spiritual lighthouse to the world. And that's the passage he quotes from Isaiah 56. This house called after God's name is to be a house of prayer for all nations. And you've turned it into a commercial enterprise that's perhaps corrupt on the edges. You have transformed what should be this grand and glorious testimony to the world into a cave of robbers. That's literally what the text says. It's often translated den of thieves or something like that, but the Greek text literally says a cave of robbers. It's a phrase right out of Jeremiah chapter 7. And no ruling priest wants to hear anybody talking about Jeremiah 7. That passage talked about a corrupt and oppressive priesthood that was doomed. And so Jesus, in effect, is warning them, you keep this up, and what happened to the first temple long ago, which led to destruction, it's going to happen to you too. And that's why they're angry. But they can't act against Jesus because the people love it. And they don't know what to do. So it's a very interesting and important passage. I'm glad we're talking about it.
So the last verse that I read there is, they're starting to now plot. How can we get rid of this guy? But they're afraid of all the people that have just, hailed him as Messiah, really, as he entered Jerusalem. And so it's makes for some interesting drama heading up to Good Friday.
I wouldn't want to be one of the advisors for the ruling priest. I don't know what do you do? Because the last thing you want to do is cause a civil war. You're supposed to keep the peace. The people love Jesus. So to act against Jesus out in the public in broad daylight very likely would spark a riot. So that's the dilemma they face, and that's what they start thinking about for the rest of Passion Week. How do we get this guy without causing an insurrection?